The dining room was a cathedral of glass and marble, where every footstep echoed privilege and every silence threatened to swallow the unworthy whole. Sunlight, sharpened by crystal chandeliers, painted halos on expensive linen and silverware fit for a monarchy. In the middle of this splendor, the billionaire CEO, Damien Firth, held court for his global partners, idly spinning a Mont Blanc pen and savoring the delicious certainty that in this room he was both king and executioner. He lived for spectacles. Beneath his tailored suit was a man built on dares and dismissals, accustomed to snapping his fingers and watching empires tremble. His latest amusement, a contract with a mysterious clause written in an obscure, archaic language, one only a handful of living scholars could decode. The translation, it was said, could make or break the biggest merger of the year. But for Damien, it was mainly a game, another opportunity to flex, to humiliate, to remind everyone who set the rules. His audience, nervous executives, foreign partners, and a retinue of staff trained never to meet his eyes. Among them, her, Elena, the housemaid, upright and invisible, moving between tables with the ease of routine and the burden of invisibility. She was always careful, always quiet, blending into the wallpaper of privilege. But fate, today, had other plans. As the chef presented an ornate dish, one of the visiting partners laughed uncertainly and gestured to the impenetrable contract, which Damien had tossed onto the table like a loaded weapon. "A fortune buried in code," the man quipped. Damien's voice was syrupy with arrogance. "Translate this and my salary's yours." He held the paper high, sneering, assuming the challenge would die unclaimed. Around the table, amusement flickered. Who would dare? At a sum that eclipsed the cost of every house in the neighborhood, it was more threat than offer. Elena stiffened, a flash of pain catching at her eyes. Her salary was less than the tea budget for the week, but she said nothing, head bowed, refusing the invitation to humiliation. But there was one who didn't shrink from the storm. From the shadows of the hallway, a clear, confident voice rang out, a voice not recognized at first by the room's constellation of power. "I can translate it." All eyes turned. By the arch stood Lila, Elena's daughter, holding a tattered backpack and balancing a tray of water with one hand, the other clutching a battered notebook. 16, whip-smart, and too often overlooked, Lila's presence here was temporary, a favor until her mother's shift ended. The room tensed, an undercurrent of disbelief, derision, and the most dangerous of all, curiosity. Damien's eyebrow arched, a predator scenting an unexpected meal. "You?" he scoffed, his voice ice over gravel. "You think you're smarter than my lawyers?" Lila did not flinch. Her eyes flickered with something that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with necessity, the raw knowledge of what this moment could mean for their lives if she was right, or what it could cost if she was not. Elena tried to catch her daughter's gaze, desperate, warning, but Lila's mind was already racing, mapping out the risk, the possibility, the story of survival written in every late-night study session, every struggle to help her mother keep the family afloat. She had no suit, no diploma, just the stubborn brilliance the world too often chose not to see. The room held its breath, the challenge now alive, electric and suddenly dangerous. Outside the window, a storm gathered, clouds curling over the city, echoing the tension on each painted face. It was no longer a game. With a careless wave of his hand, Damien tossed the contract in front of Lila, smirking. "Then by all means, girl, impress us." And as Lila stepped forward, her hands steady but her heart pounding, no one could yet guess. This was the moment that would unravel lies, expose truths, and change not only her fate, but Damien's as well. The storm was coming, and as the first drop struck the glass, one truth hovered in the vaults of that gilded room. Sometimes the smallest voice is the one the world cannot afford to ignore. But today, everyone would hear it, with consequences no one could imagine. The brittle hush that followed Damien's dare seemed to vibrate through every marble surface of the dining room. For a moment, Lila's voice hovered, too bold, too real, that every eye darted from their half-finished wine to the threadbare girl at the archway. Elena's heart pounded. She wished, just for a second, that her daughter had looked away, played invisible, spared herself the humiliation. But Lila had always been different, curious, unbreakable, born with a mind that unraveled riddles just for fun. "You're not a guest here," Elena wanted to plead, but the words stuck like stones in her throat. Damien's lips curled into a predatory smirk. He gestured grandly at a nearby chair, as if inviting a rival to a chessboard he already planned to flip. "Step right up, prodigy," he mocked. "Let's see this miracle." A round of muffled laughter, meant to flatten hopes, slipped through the polished air. Lila set down the tray, eyes scanning the contract. Sunlight caught the anxiety in her clenched hands. She forced them to relax. "Give me a minute," she said, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. The foreign language sprawled across the page, a dizzying swirl of archaic letters. But Lila's brain caught the patterns, teasing out roots, swirls, hidden structures. Years of listening to podcasts, teaching herself in secret on her mother's phone, suddenly rewound at lightning speed. Across the table, one of the foreign executives, gray-suited, cold-eyed, leaned forward, interest piqued by the girl's nerve. "Well?" he asked, impatience a razor in his accent. Damien's fingers tapped the table, the room's tension mounting. Lila's gaze darted from the contract to the faces, reading threat and hope in equal measure. Her mother hovered near the wall, willing her to stop. "It's not safe," Elena whispered silently, her eyes begging. "We can't afford the attention, Lila." Lila swallowed hard, blinking away fear. She gave the first line, halting but correct, then another, pausing to explain a nuance even Damien's lawyers had overlooked. Every translation was a high-wire act, one missed word, and she was a laughingstock, or worse. But as the sentences unfurled, she found her rhythm, confidence building. Gasps and muttered calculations rippled around the table. The foreign partner's smile widened, respect flickering. But the true obstacle was Damien. The harder Lila worked, the more he pressed, interrupting, tossing out questions, shaking her composure. "What's that clause mean, then? What's the subtext here?" Arrogance now tinged with something different. Alarm. Elena, torn between pride and terror, squeezed her hands until her knuckles blanched. Around the room, reactions split, some scoffing, some watching with predatory hope, a few, staff and servers in particular, catching the spark of something miraculous. Lila's translation caught on a phrase, the legal trap at the contract's heart. She hesitated, pulse hammering. Should she reveal it? What would this mean for her mother's job, their future, herself? The executive saw the slip, eyeing Damien for his reaction. The moment stretched. Lila took a trembling breath and spoke the truth, loud enough for every corner of the room to hear. "This section says the merger's void if any party misrepresents material assets after signing," she explained, voice clear, each word toppling carefully guarded secrets. A stunned silence. The foreign partner's face darkened. Was the billionaire trying to swindle him? Damien's mask wavered, momentarily lost for a retort. The stakes, the kind Lila couldn't have imagined, hung in the golden light. Elena reached for her daughter not to shield, but to support, her own fear replaced by ferocious electric pride. Lila's courage had sparked a fire neither of them could control. She had crossed the Rubicon. No one in that polished palace would see her or Elena the same way again. And as thunder rumbled on the city's distant edge, everyone knew. The game had changed, And this girl, this maid's daughter, was no one's pawn. But the real storm, inside and out, had only just begun. The chandelier's crystal drops seemed to tremble in the charged air, refracting whispers and darting glances. Lila steadied herself, hyper-aware of every gaze. The predatory gleam in Damien's eyes, the executives conferring in rapid, urgent undertones, the kitchen staff peeking in as if the world's axis had tilted beneath their feet. Her mother, Elena, hovered at the edge, one hand pressed to her heart, torn between the urge to flee and fight. But there was no turning back. With every word Lila uttered, the balance in the room shifted. Impressed, the foreign executive leaned closer, reading the contract alongside her and occasionally testing her with obscure idioms or double-edged phrases. Lila unfurled the meaning with humble precision, refusing any embellishment. Underneath the sweat on her palms, she grasped that what she held was more than a page. It was the power to break or remake fortunes. Damien's demeanor sharpened from amused superiority to cold calculation. "You say you know this language? Prove it," he sneered, flipping to the bottom of the page and demanding, "What about this clause? What word could possibly matter here?" It was a gamble: intimidate, corner, and distract. The guests murmured, their appetites replaced with palpable anticipation. Lila bent over the contract. Her pulse echoed in her ears as she dissected the final lines. Here, a centuries-old term tripped most translators, a term meaning mutual restitution if either party breached the contract. But with quick logic and learned intuition, she broke it down, explained the precedent derived from feudal law, and, astonishing everyone, traced it to a landmark legal case. Even the lawyers exchanged astonished, respectful glances. But as she spoke, Lila's breath caught. Damien's face blanched just enough for her to see. The clause laid bare for all was a trap for arrogance, one that, if misunderstood, could lose him millions. For years he had humiliated others in this very room. Now, suddenly, his own ignorance flickered before his guests. The foreign executive pushed aside his plate, eyes thoughtful. "She's right. In our country, malfeasance on asset reporting triggers not just penalty, but total rescission. We demand this clause stand." His tone dared Damien to reject expertise from a voice he'd tried to diminish. Tension thickened, a chessboard with pieces knocked askew. Damien forced a brittle laugh, but the table's mood had shifted. A rising talk among the partners, some impressed, others scornful, rippled through the room. One whispered, "Imagine what we've missed with all our arrogance." Elena, emboldened, moved beside her daughter. She offered Lila's translation to the nearest lawyer, voice trembling but proud. "Her word is precise. Check it if you wish." But not all were fans. Another executive, perhaps stung in pride, challenged, "Is this your own work, girl, or something you memorized to impress?" The question hung, a challenge to her honesty, her intelligence, and her right to stand at the table. Lila met it head-on. "I've spent years learning, out of sight, in libraries after long shifts. If you doubt me, ask any question in this language, in law or poetry. I'll answer." A bold claim. All eyes returned to Damien. He, flushed with anger and embarrassment, barked, "Enough games. The contract's value is in the signing, not in the clever tricks of a child." But the foreign partner shook his head. "Should we not reward talent however it finds us? Was that not your wager, Damien? Translate this and my salary's yours." The moment teetered, a crowd waiting for a fall or a miracle. Lila watched her mother's silent tears and the backroom staff's cautious admiration. She knew they watched for hope, for the impossible. A storm battered the windows, thunder shaking the glass just as her own resolve steadied. The world outside was chaos. Inside, something ancient shifted. But the trap was closing faster than anyone realized, and not just on Damien, on Lila too. There were forces that did not want a maid's daughter crowned in this palace of power. Later that day, the consequences of Lila's courage would echo beyond the manor, setting into motion betrayals, alliances, and a reckoning no one could escape. But in this moment, the impossible had already happened, and a new story was being written, line by trembling line, voice by unstoppable voice. Night fell heavy and unkind across the Firth estate. Outside, the storm continued to lash glass, as if the world itself objected to the day's upended order. Inside, the aftershocks of Lila's brilliance reverberated long after the guests had dispersed, to whisper in corners or glance furtively at their phones. Elena, her heart torn between pride and dread, hovered at her daughter's side, while staff members exchanged hopeful, fearful glances. The shift in the air felt dangerous, miraculous, and deeply fragile. Damien Firth vanished the moment the crowd thinned, retreating to his study in a silent rage. Orders had gone out. The contract would be reviewed. The lawyers would handle the matter. But everyone knew the power in the room had slipped by a single, audacious word. The house itself seemed to conspire. Doors slammed, staff scattered, stares sharpened. Elena and Lila were left in uncertain exile, waiting to discover whether a miracle was reward or curse. Lila, her mind still whirring from adrenaline, sat at the staff table with untouched tea, hands shaking when she thought no one was looking. Elena tried to comfort her, but behind every hug was fear. People like them weren't meant to rewrite destinies in plain sight. Suddenly, footsteps thundered in the hallway. Damien's personal assistant, face pale, voice clipped. "Mr. Firth wants to see you, both of you, now." Elena's breath caught. Lila's chest tightened. Together they walked the gauntlet to Damien's office, where moonlight filtered through paneled glass, and dark oil paintings seemed to lean in, eager for scandal. Damien sat behind his desk, a statue of power eroded by humiliation. Gone was the humor, only cold calculation remained. "You embarrassed me," he said without preamble, voice like a blade. "You undermined me in my own house, in front of my partners." Elena braced as if awaiting a blow. Lila, exhausted, could only manage a quiet, "I only told the truth." Damien leaned forward, eyes hard. "And what do you think that truth earns you? Gratitude, a job, my salary? The world doesn't pay for honesty, girl. It pays for loyalty or silence." He pushed a checkbook across the table, pen hovering. "Name your price. Take what you want, as promised, and be done with it. This is how you survive in the real world." The challenge in his voice was the last flicker of his wounded pride. Lila looked at her mother, defiant, terrified, trembling. In that moment she saw all the silences her family had endured, every overlooked voice, the weight of being less than in a house built for kings. "No," Lila said finally, her voice barely above a whisper but ringing with an unbreakable clarity. "I don't want your money. I want a promise. Fair pay, safety, a chance for others like me. All I ever wanted was for someone to listen." Damien's mask faltered, just for a second. "And if I don't?" "We'll go," Elena answered, stronger than she felt. "And your empire will know the truth. It was saved not by arrogance, but by the girl you tried to silence." Damien stared, measured, weighed, and for the first time seemed to really see the two of them. He realized he could lose everything: respect, wealth, the loyalty every king needs to rule. A long, quiet moment passed. The choice was his, but the world had already shifted. As Elena and Lila walked free from that office, the tension in the house snapped. Quiet awe for courage, whispered envy for those who dared. Lila's hands might still shake, but her spirit was steel. For the first time, the palace of glass and marble belonged not to the one who shouted, but to the ones who spoke truth to power. But the next dawn would test if the promise meant more than survival, if courage, once spoken, could truly break the old chains. As mother and daughter held each other in the dark, hope flickered. Maybe, just maybe, a new order had begun. The storm outside was fading, but inside, the battle for change had only truly begun. The sun crept up behind a veil of receding storm clouds, casting a hesitant gold over the Firth estate. In the wake of the previous night's reckoning, news of what had happened in the mansion spread faster than spilled wine. Whispers darted between kitchen and corridor. The maid's daughter had bested the billionaire in his own domain. Some feared for Lila and Elena, others secretly hoped. Breakfast was subdued. The usual pulse of orders subdued by uncertainty. Partners gathered in the drawing room, scanning their phones. Anxious, expectant, Lila and Elena, summoned once more, stood hand in hand by the door. Every step felt like walking on water, danger below and hope shimmering distantly. Damien Firth stood at the head of the parlor, rumpled, less a conqueror than a man forced to wrestle his own reflection. With him stood the foreign partners and his lawyer, who surveyed Lila with open respect. After last night, the lawyer announced, the contract has been reviewed. Her translation was exact, down to the variable phrasing even we missed. For a moment, silence. The devastation of certainty, the revelation that genius sometimes wears the uniform of the overlooked. Damien's jaw worked as he swallowed humiliation, and perhaps grudging admiration. He raised the checkbook once more, but this time paused. You asked for more than money, fair pay, safety, a chance for others like you. I don't forget promises. His voice veered between formality and something raw. He was not accustomed to losing, but even less to changing. Elena's grip on Lila's hand tightened. Does your word mean anything, Mr. Firth? The air sharpened. Around them, members of the staff, maids, porters, cooks watched, their fates hanging in the balance of one man's pride and one girl's courage. Damien exhaled. This house has been run on arrogance, not gratitude. That ends now, Elena. Double salary, health coverage, full contracts for the staff, beginning today. He glanced at Lila and in a voice everyone heard, said, And your daughter can work with my legal team, paid, properly credited, if she wants. Shock rippled, an offer that would change not only 2 lives, but many. Lila, stunned, met her mother's eyes. She nodded not for money, but for promise. I accept, but only if everyone is treated like they matter. Around the room, hope kindled, a spark that might finally chase old shadows from the estate's corners. The foreign partner smiled, announcing, I believe our deal can now proceed, with full faith in this new order. The other executives, seeing the winds shift, chimed in their approval. Where there had been derision, now there was respect. Wary for some, hard-won for others. Damien, humbled but not broken, offered his hand, first to Lila, then to Elena. I was wrong. The world changes by listening to those we overlook. You reminded me. For Lila and Elena, it was a beginning, not a triumph. A step through the door injustice had long held closed. Tears slipped down Elena's face. Lila stood straighter, her voice no longer shaking but strong, clear, impossible to ignore. And as the staff cheered, as partners signed the deal, as hope swept through halls where fear once ruled, the Firth mansion stood transformed not by wealth, but by courage. No empire built on silence could withstand the truth forever. And in a palace of marble and glass, it was the courage of a maid's daughter that rewrote every rule. That morning the balance of power shifted for good, and the echo of voices, once ignored, rang out through every gilded hall. The Firth estate shimmered in the dawn, its marble and silver no longer refracting only cold power but the warmth of change. In the quiet aftermath of revolution, what lingered most was not the tension of last night, but possibility, something fresh in the air, electric and fragile. Servants moved through corridors with new posture, suspicion melting slowly into cautious smiles and shy laughter. Elena and Lila, once invisible cogs in a gilded machine, walked the hall arm in arm, each step testing the unfamiliar ground of dignity regained. News traveled quickly, contracts renegotiated, wages raised, protections long denied finally written into law by the very man who once wagered his salary on a dare. Damien's promise held, this time not as a shield for his ego, but as an offering, an apology, an invitation, perhaps even a first step into humility. Morning meetings convened with both staff and executives around the same table. Lila's translation skills now formally woven into the legal team, a place she'd earned in front of the world. She wore her best clothes, but it was the confidence in her gaze, not fabric, that turned heads. For Elena, the transformation was quieter, but no less profound. She found herself speaking up in staff meetings, suggesting improvements, listening, really listening, to the stories of her co-workers. She had traded silence for action, and around her, a garden of quiet courage bloomed. Cooks volunteering recipes for new menus, porters training apprentices, maids forming informal study groups. What had started as a single act of defiance had seeded hope everywhere. Damien, too, changed. He walked the estate more slowly now, hearing grievances he once dismissed, stopping to greet staff by name. A man still learning, humbled by having been truly seen and corrected, not by a rival, but by those he once discounted as mere background. There were awkward moments, apologies fumbled, resistance from those clinging to old hierarchies, but beneath it all, a momentum that even wealth could not buy. Respect, rebuilt from the rubble. The media tried to spin Lila's story into a fairy tale, the genius maid's daughter who changed corporate law. But inside the mansion, she resisted the label of prodigy. "I'm not different," she told a reporter, "just given a chance to be heard. Everyone has something to teach, if you listen." Her words echoed through every marble corridor, an anthem for the invisible. One twilight, the staff gathered in the newly refurbished parlor, now a place for truth, not just display. Elena, her eyes misty, thanked her daughter before everyone. "You showed us that being seen changes everything. Now we are all more than we were." And as the estate glowed in the last gold of sunset, change became not an event but a way of life. Damien, Lila, and Elena, once separated by rank and silence, stood together at an open window, breathing new air into ancient walls. Outside, the world still hammered at its old barriers, but from within this house a different music played, the steady, ever-bright chord of voices that would never again go unheard. Because sometimes a single act of courage breaks centuries of silence. And from that day forward, power in the Firth estate had a new address, written in every language, sung in every voice, carried quietly down every hall by those unafraid to speak the truth.